Welcome to the Academic Writing Amplified podcast. On this podcast, we believe that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women and non-binary people are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. With our team of experienced writing coaches as co-hosts, we'll share insights and talk to inspiring guests to bring you the practical strategies, systems, and mindset shifts you need to find time to write, publish work you love, and design your career on your terms. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. Hello, and welcome back to Academic Writing Amplified. I'm Kathy Mazak, your host for this episode, where we are talking about resilience. And the title of this episode is When Your Writing Practice is Resilient, You Don't Have to Be. Before we get started, I wanted to just remind you that the very best thing that you can do to support this podcast is share it with someone who you think would get value out of listening to it. So if you've thought about what can I do to show this podcast love, the way to show the podcast love is to share it with a colleague or a friend and recommend it on. Yes, and spread the word. All right, so let's get started. So I have really mixed feelings around the word resilient, as many people do. So having lived through Hurricane Maria here in Puerto Rico and many other moments in Puerto Rican history when people here were praised for their resilience. Oh, Puerto Ricans are so resilient and blah, blah, blah. Living through that, a lot of people in Puerto Rico started to roll their eyes because they are tired of being resilient, right? So I've started to really question this term because when people talked about people being resilient, then I think the word resilient kind of avoids an understanding of structures that require resilience from some people, but not from others. So I would not use the word resilient to talk about people, but I started to think about it in terms of being applied to your writing practice. And I am embracing the word resilient when applied to your writing practice. That's because I think it captures a really important feature or aspect of a writing practice that I don't think we talk about enough, or the way that people talk about this when it comes to writing practices is always feels like punitive to me. And since you cannot write from a place of guilt, like guilt is a good way to kill your writing, any writing energy that you have, I think it's really important to talk about how you continue with your writing practice and how part of a writing practice is to be able to set your writing down and pick it back up. So many, you've heard me talk about this on the podcast before, right? Like so many people who are writing coaches or who are trying to give writing advice or who, maybe they've done this for themselves and it's been successful for them. They teach a method that in order to get more writing done, and this makes sense, right? In order to get more writing done, you have to write more, right? And one way to do that is to think about or try to or strive to write every day, right? And again, like it makes logical sense. You need to write more, so you need to write more. Like, get on it, people. Like, that's what you need to do. That's how I always felt like about that How to Write a Lot book. Sorry, but it's like how to write a lot. Just write a lot, like that's the way to do it. And for me, that wasn't helpful. And especially in that book, but in other kind of places where you find writing advice, who is to blame when you don't write? Only you. That's what I feel like is like the prevailing quote unquote wisdom out there. And I just am going to reject that because I don't think it's helpful. So instead, what I want to talk about is creating a writing practice that is resilient, okay, that can be put down and picked up. I almost said bounce back. I hate the term bounce back. We're not bouncing back. We are humans and we are making intentional choices about how to approach our writing and how to get continuity and fulfillment and sustainability in a writing practice. We are not somebody who falls down and bounces back up. There's no need for bouncing around here. Okay. So today I'm really digging into what a resilient writing practice looks like and how, if your practice is resilient, then you as a person, as a human, do not have to strive for resilience, right? Your practice does the work for you. So in my world of writing, which, by the way, if you want to know more, I wrote a book. So if you're new to the podcast and you missed all of the episodes from about, I don't know, more than a year ago, maybe a year ago, about the book coming out, I wrote a book. It's called Making Time to Write by Kathy Mazak. So go ahead and find it. It's on all the platforms. It's on Amazon and bookshop.org and all of those places. So you can go and get it. And in it, I really do try. I don't teach my kind of whole writing system like we teach in our Navigate program, but I talk a lot about creating this, what I call the sustainable relationship-based, maybe I want to add resilient as another descriptor in there, writing practice. So when I teach writing practice for academics, which, by the way, writing practices for academics are different beasts than writing practices for creative writers or novelists or, somebody who does a different type of writing. So in writing practices for academics, when I teach them, one of the really important things is that we need to acknowledge that your writing practice will get derailed. There's lots of ways that your writing practice gets derailed. I don't think I have to tell them to you. However, in the book and in my programs, I do dig into this a little bit more. So I want to talk about different types of derailments that can cause you to stop prioritizing your writing. Now, if it worked for me to tell you writing is your top priority, you need to get those publications out. So you need to put that date on your calendar and stick to it no matter what. If that worked, that is what I would tell you to do. However, that doesn't work because you can know in your heart and in your mind that your writing shouldn't be put aside. And yet things will still derail it. And this is because we are humans. All right. So let's dig into that. So let's just say, you cannot fight derailment. It's going to happen. So let's talk about all the ways that it can happen. So I'll give you the way that I think always was the one that was guiding me, which is I have these children, and as lovely as they are, they're uncontrollable in many ways. And as other humans living in my home, and one of the ways in which they are uncontrollable is their health, right? So you can feel whatever ways you want about, if you woke up one day and you were like, I don't feel like writing, so I'm not going to. You can think thoughts about that. But to make the prevalence of derailment very crystal clear, when I was a professor, I would wake up, I'd be like, it's my Friday, it's my writing day, here we go. And then kid has a fever. Kid throws up while you're getting them dressed for school. Whatever, all of these things that can happen as oh, there goes that. And there's no amount of personal resilience or if I just had more commitment, I would have written that day that my kid got sick and so I had to clear my day. No, my personal commitment is to my child. That's not me being weak or I don't know, whatever other BS things we say, or you might say to yourself or people might say about you. So At least for me, like, let's be like very honest. Like, I know that there are probably people in the world who could wake up with a sick kid and somebody else would take care of it and they would get their writing done. But that was never me. And that's okay. So that is one example of a derailment. So when I talk about derailments in the book, I kind of try to categorize them as two types of derailments. There's life derailments, and then there's somewhat predictable or expected derailments, that things that will derail your writing practice that are part of the academic life. Okay. So I want to think about, like, we get derailed by both things that are predictable and that are unpredictable. And I do think there is room to take more ownership of the predictable derailments. So we don't need to take, like, obviously, in my example of my kid getting sick, like, yeah, that's the kid got sick. There's nothing else that I could do. I couldn't have planned for it better or whatever. That is a good example of how you need to be able to put down your writing practice and pick it back up, which I will talk about in a bit. But there are some predictable derailments that kind of get us every time. And I think those can be handled so much better with a little bit of mindset work. So let me tell you what I'm talking about here. So, predictable derailment. You will go to a conference. You will get a revise and resubmit back, right? You don't know when, but it will happen, right? So it's not predictable in terms of the date that you will get the R&R back, but if you submitted something, you're either going to get a rejection or an R&R or an acceptance, probably one of the first two, at some point, right? So you know it will happen. You know, it's not like completely unpredictable. Yes, the date that it will happen is unpredictable, but you know that's coming, right? Large amounts of grading that you have to do. Other kinds of big deadlines, maybe like, for example, people who are on committees that do like accreditation work, like whenever you're doing like that, and there's like deadlines for accreditation, or you have some kind of planned academic visit, or you're putting on a talk or something like that, you know, like these things that are not part of our everyday life as academics, they're special events. Some of them are really positive, right? Like if you got an R&R back, that's great. Like that is like unpredictable, or it's semi-predictable, and it's great. That's a great derailment, right? You know, and then the other things like the grading backlog and stuff, those are kind of predictable. Like you assign the grading, so you know when the flood of grading is going to come in. So with predictable academic derailments, and what I mean by these things, again, are like, these are part of your job. These are things that are part of your job. They're somewhat or very predictable, and yet they derail our writing practice. To solve those problems or to make your writing practice more resilient, then what you need to do is better accept your humanity around those moments and make a plan and have a way to put down your writing and pick it back up. Have a writing practice that is resilient so that you know, oh, you know what? This week it's going to be a big grading week. Maybe it's going to be 10 days of a lot of grading. I know that if I skip my scheduled writing time twice in the next 10 days, I'm fine. I'll do these things so that when I go back to my writing, I can pick it back up. And yes, there are like technical things to do, right? Like we talk about, you can leave yourself breadcrumbs. There's lots of like stuff to do that you can make your writing easier to get back to. However, I think the main thing here is mindset. Like the main work is understanding that is like getting rid of all or nothing thinking, right? Where if you're like, oh, I'm so behind with my grading, and so I'm just skipping over my writing practices, and then I'm behind in my writing, right? So that message that you're telling your brain is, those thoughts are saying behind, behind, behind. The feelings they create are feelings of overwhelm and exhaustion. That's not what we want. We want to create feelings of, I'm on top of this. I have energy. I'm okay, right? So the thoughts have to change. The thoughts have to be, every semester I assign this project, it takes a lot of time to grade. And for that reason, I'm going to prioritize grading and I'll get back to my writing when it's done. Or I got an R&R. That's fantastic. I'm so excited. I'm going to put down the writing project I was working on and substitute it out with the R&R until I get it submitted again. And that's okay. That is my professional choice. Okay. So that thinking is very different from the overwhelm and the I'm always behind and the like dramatic, woe is me kind of thinking, right? That is what you actually can stop. So if you've ever had the thought, there's not enough hours in the day, this happens to me all the time. I'm speaking from experience. Okay. If you ever have the thought there's not enough hours in the day, that is a thought and it creates nasty feelings of overwhelm and anxiety and stress. And you can change that. It's helpful to change that, not just through thinking, but also through some skill development, right? Like, so if you have skill development around your writing practice, like you learn about how to have a sustainable, relationship-based, resilient writing practice. When you have those skills, it's easier to change the thoughts, right? The things come hand in hand, but they are both necessary because you can have all the skills in the world and you're still thinking that you're a hot mess and you will not ever not be a hot mess because you have not aligned your thoughts to your new skill set. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the thoughts around unpredictable derailments. And then I'm going to talk about what are the things that a resilient writing practice has anyway. Okay. So unpredictable derailments, let's take illness as one. Illness, your own illness, or somebody else in your family that you're a caretaker of, or even maybe you're not the main caretaker of that person, but somebody in your household. One of the things that I think is really important is that we really embrace and accept and understand deeply our humanity. Again, one of my favorite books is The Slow Professor. And I reference it in my book. And I just love that book so much. Easy to read in a weekend, and it'll just set your brain straight about how you are not, how academia, even though we put it on this little pedestal, it's like this ivory tower business, is still capitalism. And it's still late stage fast capitalism. And it still expects you as a worker to produce like a robot or like a non-human. So once you kind of recognize that, you can start to say like, wait, no, of course there's ebbs and flows. Of course there's ups and downs. The career is long. Writing an academic anything is long. Months, years it takes to write articles, do the research and write the articles, or write a book. Years, the timeline's long. So of course there's going to be ups and downs. Stuff's going to happen because you're a human. So again, it's so much mindset. It's changing your mindset around how you think about getting derailed. It's never pleasant, right? Like it's terrible. It's terrible to wake up and you thought you were going to have this week where maybe even you had like a bunch of writing sessions planned and nice things were supposed to happen, and you wake up with a fever and you're vomiting. Like that sucks. And you also are a human. And so having a writing practice that, again, you don't have to be so resilient when you can have the confidence that your writing practice is resilient. And so again, the mindset, instead of like, I don't have time to be sick. Have you ever said that to yourself? I don't have time to be sick. I know I have said that to myself. I don't have time to be sick. I don't have time for this. especially pre-COVID, like we would drag ourselves all kinds of places sick. And I think that unfortunately hasn't changed as much. The stickiness of like not going out when you're sick that happens like because of COVID isn't quite as sticky as I want it to be. I want people to stay home when they're sick. I want them to take care of themselves, stay in bed, like take care of yourself. That hadn't been a lasting change as much as I wanted it to be. Anyway, the point is, if you're having thoughts that are like, I don't have time to be sick, I'm going to be so behind, blah, 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 those thoughts lead to very nasty feelings of overwhelm and anxiety and fear of like, I'm not going to get these things done. And maybe I'm not going to get promoted, or I won't get the grant, or my co-author's going to be mad at me, or whatever. All of that can be addressed somewhat, at least, with two things, right? Resilient writing practice, you have one, and your thoughts around it. So if you have a resilient writing practice, if it's a writing practice that you can press pause and then press play again, and you have the skills to like get it up off the ground once you've put it down, then your thoughts can be, man, this sucks. I feel terrible. I'll address what I need to address when I get well. Or even something so good as like, oh, I wish I could be doing my writing sessions this week, but I can't. So I'm glad I know just what I'll need to do in 2 weeks when I can kind of get back, So to summarize, and then I'm going to talk about what, like technically and skill-wise, what are we developing when we talk about a resilient writing practice? So your writing practice needs to be resilient because you will get derailed. You might get derailed in professionally predictable ways. You might get derailed from writing because of being a human and getting ill, or something else happens, or whatever, big moments in your life, those things, because life ebbs and flows, because things go up and down. So that's why the writing practice needs to be resilient. And then you don't have to be so damn resilient, right? Like you don't have to be like, oh, no, I was sick with a fever and I did it anyway, right? That's what people get praised for. And that is a load of BS. So don't do that. So what makes a resilient writing practice? All right. So first of all, the only place where I teach all of this in depth is inside of our Navigate program. As you know from listening to this podcast, the waitlist is open. You can go to scholarsvoice.org/navigate, sign up for the waitlist so you're the first one to know when we enroll again, and we can coach you through, teach you, and then coach you through building your resilient writing practice. Okay, so have to make that plug, of course. All right, so a resilient writing practice is not one technique. Okay, so one technique is write every day for X number of minutes. That is a singular technique. It does not create a writing practice. Okay. In my world of teaching, and the way that we teach at Scholars Voice, the way that Gina and I coach, what makes a resilient writing practice are multiple techniques. Sometimes I like to call it like a bag of tricks. I feel it's more organized than a bag of tricks, but I picture like Mary Poppins with her carpet bag, and she's like pulling lamps and things out of it. So you don't have just one tool in your bag of tricks. When you need to move a writing project forward, you have multiple tools that you can use to do it. So the drawing of our soaring system is a pyramid because you have like a set of tools that you use on the regular, like weekly. And then you have kind of semesterly things, and then you have once a year things. So those different tool sets that you can employ, that you can pull out of your magic carpet bag and use to move a project forward, you have those at your disposal. You have learned them. They are skills that you have. We teach them inside of our programs when we talk about building that soaring system. You also are working on your relationship with writing. And your relationship with writing needs to be positive. It needs to be something that you can't wait to write because writing fills you up. And yeah, you have frustrating days. Everybody does. Everybody opens the document and starts, and they're like, I'm ready to go. And then you can't form a freaking sentence and you have to close it and start again the next day. Like that happens. But what we're looking for is to make that the outlier and to make the norm that you sit down, you're able to tap into flow pretty consistently and pretty easily. And you feel positive thoughts when you think about your writing. If you're at the point in your career where when you think about having to write your academic work, right, your papers, your grants, your book, when you're thinking about that, what you feel is guilt and overwhelm, then you are in a stuck place. You are in a place that you're not going to be able to like pull out of without some work, without some skill development and mindset work around your writing. And that is the place, actually, my favorite people to coach are the people who are there, but they have a memory of when they loved writing, that they're not afraid of the page. They're just so overwhelmed with other things and so quote unquote behind in their minds that they can't make it happen. Those are the people who I love to work with and navigate because we can fix that. We can fix that. That's our jam. So anyway, what does a resilient writing practice need? It needs more than one tool. Okay. It needs a set of tools that you know how to employ. Like to get, if you put something down, you have a set of tools, not just one, in order to pick it back up. It has an emphasis, the writing practice, the way you learn the practice has an emphasis on your relationship with writing, on developing a positive relationship with writing. Okay, that's why I call the writing system relationship-based. The core of it is that you have a positive relationship with the practice of writing. Okay, what else? You also need to learn about how you work. And unless somebody kind of stops you and says, hey, here's a space for you to get meta about your writing practice, it's unlikely that you will do it. I'm asking you to do it now, though. Like one of the things you can do, you can read my book. You know, if you don't want to take Navigate or you're not eligible for Navigate because you're not a professor, then I would read professional development books about writing, but especially read my book. And I think you will find some tools in there to just start to do that, like back up and look at that big picture of what your practice is. Again, it's a combination of skill development. You need to understand what motivates you to write. You need to get a very human take on lack of motivation. It is not a personal fault or a moral failing to have a lack of motivation. You're probably tired. So you need to know what motivates you. You need to know how to structure writing sessions so that they flow. You need to know how to break projects into tasks in a way that works for you. And the better you get at predicting your time to task, the more confidence you will have around your writing practice. And the more it will be resilient because you can pick it back up. Because you can say, okay, I lost this much time, but that's fine. Now I know how to like adjust my expectations around when I'm going to get these projects done because I know how long it takes me to do things. And that is a skill that we teach you, but that will take 12 to 18 months to master, if not longer. That's the hardest one, truthfully. But people do it. And it is available to you to learn how to predict your time to task. And when you can, it's really, really amazing. It really helps the relationship with writing when you're like, oh yeah, this is how long this is going to take me. And you're within the ballpark instead of you misestimated by half or 3 times. So to conclude, the writing practice is so important and it deserves your time and attention. And as I talked about in a previous episode, you've been developing your writing practice since you were a little kid, since you first started drawing. And now it's different because your professional use of writing is different. And you can't just take advice about what creative writers would do. It's not the same. It is not the same animal. So if you are interested in learning more, just stick with me on this podcast. And again, as I mentioned at the top of the episode, the best thing you can do is share the podcast with your friends. If you want to help me out, if you want to, pay us back a little for the work that we do on this podcast, just sharing it is all I really ask. And then also know that there are other resources available to you, including my book, Making Time to Write, available in all the book places. And also, of course, our Navigate program, which focuses on writing and publishing for ambitious academics who are disrupting their fields, working at the intersections of fields, any career stage. And you can get on the wait list for that program by going to scholarsvoice.org/navigate. Link should be in the show notes. Find the pink button, sign up for the wait list, and the next time we enroll, you'll get a message about it. I hope that you have an absolutely wonderful week and that you found some juicy nuggets. You don't need to be resilient when your writing practice is. Have a great week. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time supporting yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you like what you heard today, the best way to say thank you is to hop on over to Apple iTunes and write an honest review. The more reviews, the more amazing academic women and non-binary people will find this podcast. So go write one now.